Just weeks after the Civil War ended, a steamboat blew apart on the Mississippi River in the middle of the night, killing more people than would later die on the Titanic. Most Americans have never heard its name. This is the story of the Sultana, the deadliest maritime disaster in American history, buried by a country too exhausted and too distracted to notice it had happened. The Sultana was a wooden sidewheel steamboat built in Cincinnati in 1863, 260 feet long, designed to carry fewer than 400 passengers and crew on its regular run between St. Louis and New Orleans. When the war ended, the federal government began paying steamboat owners by the head to carry paroled Union prisoners of war home from Confederate camps like Andersonville and Cahaba, turning starving, exhausted men into a cash incentive and pushing boat captains to compete for the largest possible load. Days earlier, at a stop in Vicksburg, a cracked boiler plate needed fixing. A full repair would take 2 or 3 days the ship's captain wasn't willing to lose with a profitable government contract waiting. So a boilermaker hammered the bulged plate back into shape and riveted on a thinner patch instead, finishing the job in about a day. On April 27, 1865, the Sultana pushed north from Vicksburg carrying roughly 2,400 people, paroled Union soldiers packed onto every deck, plus crew and paying passengers, on a boat built for a sixth of that number. She stopped in Memphis that evening, then continued upriver into a Mississippi River running high and fast with the spring flood. A few hours later, several miles north of the city, in the dead of night, one boiler exploded, and a split second later, 2 more went with it. The blast tore through the middle of the ship, killing or maiming hundreds instantly and setting the wooden vessel ablaze. Men who had just survived months or years in Confederate prison camps were thrown into a freezing river in total darkness or trapped on a burning deck with no way down. Many couldn't swim, and months of starvation in prison camps had left them too weak to hold on to debris for long. Survivors clung to floating wreckage, drifting animals, and riverbank trees as the current carried them miles downstream in the cold. Steamboats from Memphis, including the Bostonna, turned back toward the wreck and pulled survivors from the water for hours. When it was over, an estimated 1,800 of the roughly 2,400 people aboard were dead, making the Sultana the deadliest maritime disaster in American history, ahead of the Titanic decades later. An investigation found what should have been obvious. An overloaded, top-heavy boat and a hastily patched boiler had pushed the water levels and steam pressure past what the ship could handle. Almost no one paid for it. The quartermaster accused of taking a bribe to overload the ship left the service before he could be court-martialed. The officer who oversaw loading the prisoners was never seriously pursued. Captain Mason, who had chosen to patch the boiler rather than replace it, died in the explosion himself. The disaster reached newspapers already consumed by the death of John Wilkes Booth one day earlier, the funeral of Abraham Lincoln, and the final surrenders ending the Civil War. A catastrophe that killed more Americans than any shipwreck before or since barely made it past the front page. The men aboard the Sultana had already survived a war and a prison camp. They died feet from home in a tragedy the country was too tired and too distracted to fully grieve. If you want more stories of the disasters History Forgot, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.